Okay. Morning, everybody. So, the title of my talk this morning is Video Over the Internet, Can We Break the Net? Again, my name is Mark Kortekaas. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for CBS Interactive. My email address is up there, so flame away afterwards or currently while you're sitting here. A little about my background. I've been with CBS now for 7 years. Prior to CBS, I was with Sony for a number of years in their online gaming group. I was with NBC as part of their first digital group for a couple of years. I did my master's degree at the Media Lab. I have an undergrad degree in photography, so I actually have a fine arts degree. And I've been doing big media stuff now for 15 years. So about 2-3 months ago, I guess it was, I was asked to give the keynote for this. And I said, okay, that sounds fine. I can do that. And then they said, well, how long do you want? And I said, well, just sort of tell me how long other people have done it. Well, then I find out no one's done it before. So I'm like, I'm not really sure what my agenda should be. I figured video, because we're a video company. Not sure how to measure success, though, for this, because my success metric is, I originally thought was success is really you'll have a keynote the next time. But then I was at dinner last night, and a whole bunch of people said, no, that's really not success for this group. The more successful thing is if after the end of today you sort of ask questions and throw things at me and do all sorts of other things. So hopefully you're going to ask questions when we're done and go from there. The presentation's going to be about 30 minutes. I'll take questions after that. A little bit about the keynote, though. I'm not really here to sort of say anything that hopefully people don't already know. I'm sort of here to throw out a bunch of questions and hopefully make you guys think and go from there. So a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. It's really video over the internet. You can call it IP television. So figured I'd take a step and define what IPTV is, and I think the first one really sums it up. And it really is, and I'll sort of read this one, but it's a system where digital television service is delivered using the internet protocol over a network infrastructure, which may include delivery by broadband connection. For the sake of this talk, though, I'm going to focus on the public internet. So while there's a lot of interesting IPTV things out there that cable and telco companies are doing, I'm not going to focus in on sort of the smaller part of the I'm sorry, not smaller, but not focus in on spot solutions. I'm really talking more about either the one-to-many or many-to-many connections over broadband. So, someone going to cbs.com or one of our other sites. So, CBS Interactive, who are we? The groups that I run are technology for CBS Entertainment, News, Sports, Star Trek, Entertainment Tonight, and Showtime. And technically, because this is a technical group, who are we? We're AS 6102 and 6641. We run 3 different data centers, New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. We're about 1,200 servers. So depending on the group, if you have lots of questions about how to run large-scale server farms, we could have that discussion. We have 26 gigs of uplink capacity. Again, for this group, that's all transit. We are interested in connections to networks that have large consumer bases. We are a content company. We don't have a lot of consumers on our network. We're interested in pushing out large transit outbound from us. We utilize 2 external CDN vendors. You can guess who they are. One thing about our farms, which is probably a little different than the way we do utilization, all of our capacity is really maxed out at 10% utilization on a nominal basis. So on a normal day, if we're at 10%, we get a little worried. On a day like today, we're probably 4 or 5% load, and that's really across the board. That's on bandwidth, that's on server capacity, really all the normal metrics that you would think of. So a couple weeks ago, I was at CES in Vegas, and our CEO, Leslie Moonves, was giving a keynote. And the general gist of the keynote was where we as CBS as a company see video and audio and user interaction happening around content. And he started the keynote with the following video, which actually I thought I'd play, and then I'll talk about it right after.
Since the dawn of civilization, man has demonstrated a fundamental need to gather. From the first fire to the Last Supper, from the audience at the Globe Theater to the global audience that watched man's first steps on the moon.
And we're getting a picture on the TV.
The desire for shared experience has always drawn a crowd. In ancient Greece, the stage is set for the first live audiences. At the Roman Colosseum, the gladiator's fate is decided with the wave of a hand. Audience interactivity is born. Crowds view executions of the Salem witches. The audience is horrified and entertained. The War of the Worlds grips the nation, creating panic as millions hear of a Martian invasion. Over 70 million witness a cultural revolution with the American debut of
The Beatles!
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you.
Over the next 40 years, the pace of communications accelerates as the analog universe goes digital.
The Force will be with you.
Every age gives rise to new media, and from every medium, new audiences emerge. Audiences seeking shared experience. To laugh, to cry, to think, to dream, to interact.
The new frontier is here.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. Roger.
To infinity and beyond.
Curious.
I'm as fine as hands on the line. What I do?
I'm really happy. Log on or text your vote.
I have got to get me one of these. Wow.
So I watched that and I sat there and said, great, CEO's out there saying we're doing lots of stuff, which we are. And I said, well, crud, what does that mean for me? So started really thinking about it, and it's really, the future is more technology, more user interaction, but it's really not just about technology or any one particular thing. We've been doing television for 70, 80 years. We've been doing radio longer than that. We've got lots of different media, but what do people do with it? How do people relate to content? How are people going to use content in the future? And all of that stuff actually does have more technology requirements, which is where we get involved. Been involved, like I said at the beginning, I've been involved with media for the last, big media companies for the last 15 years, and been hearing for the last 15 years about how big media is a dinosaur and how the industry's going away. And people ask me all the time, why do you still work for a dinosaur? You know, you guys just don't get it. You really don't have a clue. And I've never really bought that argument. We still do a lot of stuff, and I'll go over in a second just how large scale our reach is. And that's not to say that we don't take new technologies and the internet very seriously. We do. But I figured I'd step back and sort of walk through where, you know, sort of my partners on the business side, on the video side, really look at the world. So the first thing, television ratings, and a lot of you probably know this, but sort of step through television ratings and how we measure our world in television and the numbers that we use for audience. So the next two graphs really talk about ratings, and the first one to sort of line up what this all means. So this is a rating for a primetime television show, which is really Monday, I guess actually, it's all 7 days of the week, from 8 to 11. This is Big Four network, CBS, ABC, Fox, and NBC, all primetime regularly scheduled shows. So these are shows that are regularly scheduled. These are not specials or other sporting events, what have you. This is for last season. An average household share for all shows of 11%. And let me define what share is. That's the percent of households or persons using a television at that time who are tuned into a specific program, station, or network. Average viewers for those shows, almost 11 million viewers. Compare that with a top 10 show. So again, 2005, 2006 season, same networks. Top 10 regularly scheduled primetime. Top 10 shows are things like Survivor, CSI, Lost, Desperate Housewives, American Idol. Had an average household share of 21%, with 22 million people watching at any one given point in time. Big event, biggest event of the year, Super Bowl. We just broadcast that on CBS the other night. These are ratings from actually Sunday night. Average household share 64%, 93.2 million viewers. Big numbers. This is really how we define success on the television side. How do we do that? We use technology that's largely been in place. A bunch of video engineers will shoot me for sort of simplifying it, but we've been using technology that's been in place since the 1920s. We do this with single transmitters covering an entire metro area. The United States, Canada, and other countries are blanketed with buildings or big antennas. The entire market's covered with one transmitter. The entire U.S. market or international market's covered from one satellite transponder. Yes, there are backup transmitters, there's backup satellite signals, but at any one given point in time, there's only one signal going out. It covers the entire U.S. The size and the location of the local transmitter determines coverage area, and we don't care as a company whether 1 or 1 million people are watching. So it costs us the same to broadcast at 2 in the morning as it costs us to broadcast in prime time. For instance, WCBS Television, which is specifically our digital channel out of New York, we have one 349 kilowatt transmitter on the Empire State Building, and that covers the entire New York City market. The New York City market, as defined by that particular transmitter, is this circle in blue there. I don't know if you can see the laser pointer or not. We do not do anything different, and I sort of said this before, we do not do anything different for a big event or a small event. We don't care. The only difference for us is if we're doing a big event, we send more trucks, more cameras, more personnel out to actually shoot the event. So it's a really easy model for us to model on the business side. How much is it going to cost us to do production for a Super Bowl, a golf event, an entertainment show? Because once we actually pay for the content and get it back to New York for uplink, everything else is, well, not free, but defined. There's no risk. There's no question about how much is it going to cost us to actually serve. Compare that to the internet, though. How do we do it on the internet today? So step back a couple of slides. You saw the difference between an average show and a big show. We have big surges. 2 in the morning, not many people are watching. 8 p.m. in the evening for Survivor, a lot of people are watching. Super Bowl, even more people. On the internet, in my world, and remember I said 10% utilization, we have 10x bursts on a very normal basis. We get the advantage with sports and entertainment that we usually know about events in advance. We just have no idea how big they are. So again, looking at this weekend Super Bowl, we had a 300% increase in traffic in under 90 seconds, right after a call-out. The specific call-out was the MVP vote. News gives us no warning. We have no idea when news events are going to happen. The best we ever get is a couple days. And even that's pretty rare. And I cite one example, like the state funeral. We get other scheduled news events, but the scheduled news events tend not to be the ones that get big internet audience. The ones that get big internet audience are breaking news that happens during the business day. We can never predict when it's going to happen. The last one is really something that matters a lot to us, because when we talk about 5 nines reliability within television world, we really do mean 5 nines of reliability. On the internet, we don't really have that. We don't have a quality service. We get things like BGP resets upstream. There was a talk yesterday about how that could be improved, but we see when we see one of our providers do a BGP reset, we see the effect of that in video traffic and other things. And what would happen if one of those happened during the final 2 minutes of any sporting event? Take 30 seconds to sort of reconverge. You take another 30 seconds for all the PCs to reset. And if you're lucky, someone called a timeout in that 2 minutes. The other thing that makes it a little bit strange is I have to know what my peaks are because I have to provision. I also have to model pricing because I'm a business. We're a profitable business. I try to keep it that way, but it's really hard when you don't know what peaks are. All I get is my content people coming to me saying, I have a big event. How big? I don't know. But then they want it to work and they want a guarantee. So when they say, I don't know, my answer to them on can it work is, I don't know. Makes sort of warm fuzzies with senior management. Here's an event, here's an example of a live event we did last December. So this is an internal graph. It represents a single distribution node for a live event we did. The specific event was a live talk show for, I believe it was Survivor, so this was an entertainment talk show. This was scheduled in advance, so we knew it was coming. But again, we had no idea how big the event was going to be. And so this is sort of a normal day in, day out type event. We get news events like this all the time. So you have the nice, again, I don't know if the laser pointer is big enough, have the nice burst up there. You can see when it went live. You have your peak, which is actually at the end of the event. And then this valley here is actually a reset on the video, and then we re-aired it. So it was a 1 hour event. Total time elapsed here is 2 hours, but we re-aired it. The peak on this particular graph is almost 2,000 visitors, and that represents approximately 1.2 gigs of transit. Again, that's 1.2 gigs of transit that had a nominal usage of, well, those little dots there are us testing. So how do you plan for that? It's really pretty difficult. Live events are our biggest challenge from an internet point of view. But it's a requirement. Without live, I don't really have a business. Think of sporting events. If you want to watch a live sporting event, you need to see it live. Even scheduled television, people do watch it live. News events, same thing. You really don't re-watch the entire news or sporting event. We rerun a highlight. Video on demand, on the other hand, and so I'm not trivializing video on demand. Video on demand actually gives us our normalized pattern. So that allows me to build the network and sustain it at sort of the 10% margin that I talked about at the beginning. And actually, over time, does draw, for us today anyways, draws a lot more traffic than live does. It also has the advantage of it's relatively consistent week in and week out. We can model it. We sort of watch our utilizations, we watch our pricing, and we can watch all usage. I know, for instance, that May will be a very busy month for us because of the end of the television season. I know June will be very quiet for us. I know we pick up again in July. And that's just the way it works. So we have the benefit on video on demand that we know when things are coming. Live, again, there's maybe only 10 companies out there that really care about true live video, and we're one of them. How do we do that? We do that with pretty traditional mass market technologies. There's nothing on this slide that should be a surprise to anyone. All of this stuff is common. Windows Media, Reel, and Flash today. There's some other stuff we're looking at. Unicast IP. So TCP or UDP, not here to say which one's better. There's benefits. But we don't specifically say as a company, well, this is a TCP problem or UDP problem. Windows Media, Reel, or Flash does it for us. Whatever the server does is what we use. Whatever the Cdns are deploying this week is what we use. Quality of service matters a lot in video. Again, video buffering, sort of annoying as all heck. But, as we all know, quality of service does not exist. Where do we do in terms of bit rates today? High bit rate video for us is 600K. And then we add in audio on top of that. We add in headers, sort of nominally 600, 650K. So we use sort of different metrics. But that one's actually sized specifically to get through DSL folks. So 768K, if you think about what I'm doing, I've got a video stream, I've got a web page, I've got banner ads rolling. We've optimized that video really as fast as we can realistically get on a 768K DSL line, and we hope that no one has any network blips while we do it. But how does that compare with other video technologies? DVD, again, I sort of put these up here, but DVDs anywhere up to 8 megs a second. HDTV over the air as we do it today is 19. Blu-ray is 36. We will continue to increase bitrate. So I'm going to talk in a bit about bandwidth and bandwidth utilization, but that's where we're at today. We're going to go up higher. So, you know, there's some 2 meg video that we are looking at today for consumers that can actually get it. Primetime show bandwidth. So I looked at, again, go back a couple of slides, look at the New York market and look at everything within that blue circle that you saw. And I took a single CSI episode, which we aired in November, and the date's up there, November 16th. So this was a first-run CSI episode. New York market ratings for that was 22%, with an average viewers of 1.5 million viewers just watching, and that's just New York. So hopefully my math here holds. 600K stream gives us 650. We'll assume that viewers are watching all 60 minutes. To deliver just the New York market, if I've done my math right here, it's 999 gigabits per second. And again, this is all unicast. For those CDNs out there who are doing things in a per byte model, it's 359 terabytes served. And just out of curiosity, and I didn't even sketch this out because I'm not even sure I could, but how much would it cost and how would you deploy a 1 terabit network connection that you would actually sustain 1 terabit at? And then we'd have to have redundancy and failover, so that means I actually need 2 terabits. That's theory. There's no way, I think we'd all agree that that would work. And again, keep in mind that this is New York market only. So this is just one market. The actual US audience for this show was over 22 million. So how do we actually do things with sort of more normal events? And March Madness, we'll say, is a very big, successful internet event that we actually did. So this was last year. What we did was we provided access on the internet to games which are not being broadcast in the local market. So the way the tournament works, just sort of step back, we've got, during the first Thursday, Friday games, we've got 4 games going on at any one point in time. At the local television network basis, the local television market determines which station or which game they're going to play. So if you're in Chicago and Illinois is playing, you're clearly going to get the Illinois game. But if you're in New York and Seton Hall's playing, Seton Hall's going to play. But if you're an Illinois fan in Chicago, if you're an Illinois fan and you're living in New York, you want to see the Illinois game, you had no way of doing it. So what we did was we put all of those games up on the internet, and if you were in New York and wanted to watch the Illinois game, you could. We did a 400K video feed, and again, add in headers, or a 33K audio feed. We deliberately did not do multi-bit rate, and we did not go below 400K. And the reason we did this was for quality reasons. Specifically, the mid-court basketball shot where you're doing a pan across the screen looks like sort of crap, and at 400K, it barely holds together. The first Thursday afternoon, which was our internet peak, we did 268,000 users. Again, this is all unicast. This was all Windows Media, and it worked. What are we doing for 2007? We've got changes going on to increase the video bandwidth, and our goal on the tech side and the business side was to double our 2006 capacity, which we're in the process of doing. And again, this is all unicast and traditional technology. So there's nothing in this that, given enough time and energy, someone couldn't do. So is that going to, so will the internet really scale with unicast? And sort of my hypothesis, and sort of throw it out there, is realistically, no. We're not going to scale with technologies that we have today on unicast for live events. Question really for the group, and I don't have an answer for this, will true multicast ever be enabled? We've been talking about it for 15 plus years, probably even longer than that. And from a commercial point of view, I know it works. It's technically possible for me to deploy a network if I control it that actually does do it. But it realistically isn't out there in a mass market way that I could deploy as a content person. And I couldn't just put a multicast feed out there and expect all consumers to get it, which sort of chicken and egg problem. I'm in a boat where I have to have something that's deployable out to the masses in order for it to be worth my effort to do it. But without people doing it, you know, why would anyone actually turn on multicast? Peer-to-peer. I get a lot of people coming to me with peer-to-peer. Is to solve all your stuff, and I've got an example on the next page about it. Peer-to-peer is very interesting. We're looking at it very closely. There's a bunch of issues that I have with it when we start talking about higher bit rates, but it is very interesting. The thing that seems to be missing, though, is really the last point, and it really holds for multicast and it holds for peer-to-peer. Who gets paid? And it's a fair question. Net neutrality, all of the other things, but it's a very viable question about what the economic model should be. Today, is it just acceptable that consumers will pay as end users? Maybe. Maybe we should pay on our side and figure out some way to pay for multicast. Given the economics today and the fact that I pay on transit on a per gig basis, though, the providers want me to push as many gigs as I can, which is fine. I get it. You guys make more money at that side. It just won't scale to the markets that we need to go long term. So we have to come up with new economic models on how this is going to work. So let's look at peer-to-peer. So let's take a 600K stream again. And again, video, audio, encode rate is 600K. And I'm going to say here, just for the sake of easy math, this is 600K all in. Take 100,000 viewers. I have 50% on a DSL line, or 50% on a line that can do 1 gig in both, or 1 meg in both directions. So again, relatively simple math. 60 gig event. Nice round number. If you look at that, what's available from the 256K uplinks? You got 12.8 gigs. I got 50 gigs available from my 1 meg, so this is great. I, as CBS, need a single 600K feed. My ISP provides me with a T1, which, given today's rates, is a wonderful number for me. I can make this work economically. Let's have at it. Doesn't work if we go above 1 meg, and the numbers actually fall apart pretty quickly when you think there's overhead and the fact that 256K is actually shared and can't be at 100%. But there's definitely something there. Of course, the various cable and telco providers out there are thinking, well, peer-to-peer is already 50, 60% of my traffic. You guys are coming in on the commercial side, looking at new commercial endeavors. You're just adding more and more. Does that really scale for you on the ISP side? I don't know. Maybe. You tell me. But it is a concern of mine. So where are we headed? More bandwidth. 600K is really just acceptable today on a computer screen. And our audience today is consumer-based. It's computer screens. That's where we're at today. I'll get to in a couple pages. The concern I have is that that's where we're at today. So let me I ran this clip of just a short event, and then I've got some things off of it.
Rating's pretty high. Looks like Mike didn't dive in there by choice.
So if he didn't dive, he was pushed.
So I took that clip, and that clip there, just for reference, was a 56 meg HD signal that we encoded. So audio, very high bit rate, video, very high bit rate. Took that same thing down to a 600K sample. And I don't know if these screens are actually going to work here. Hopefully you can see the detail differences. But the detail difference that you really see are things like face details. So you can actually see details on the face here. There's really no details on the faces here. On sort of a more generalized shot, you get details here. You really have no details here, which I guess is all right. You sort of get the content idea. It works well. Another shot here, you've got detail up here, and again, hopefully you're able to see that. You've really got washed out detail here in the grass. And for anyone who's actually watched sports in high def, there is a big difference in actually being able to see grass details and things like that in the field. This stuff matters to consumers. Why does it matter to us? Well, Apple just, interestingly enough, about a month ago, Apple just announced something, the Apple TV. Neat little box. It's got an internet connection. Plays all sorts of QuickTime stuff. It's also got an HDMI 1080i output. So now all of a sudden now we're getting viable consumer devices that can take an internet signal and feed a 50-inch plus flat screen HD content. People are going to want that. And if you recall, if you go back where we're at bit-wise, DVD quality is only 8 megs a second. So you're getting into very high bit rate scenarios in the not-so-distant future. And what happens if consumers start to really demand the use of that? It's one thing to say it's all on demand, but even an on-demand model, you start running your numbers and looking at what's going to happen there, and the numbers for bits and all sorts of other things start to really climb. And there will be more consumers online at all times. So this is where, where we're headed, and how are we going to do it? So first off, we're all in a challenge mode. We all love, look at the audience that's in this room. We enjoy building large, complex networks. It's just fact. We all love pulling the boxes of Cisco gear out, or Foundry gear, or whoever it is this week, and racking up big stuff. We love walking through data centers and seeing all sorts of power and everything else, and it's what we do. We're all tech geeks. Will the internet replace over-the-air broadcast? Maybe eventually. I don't think you're going to see that in the next 10 years. Beyond that, who knows? But it's important to note that the internet and the TV world currently augment themselves today and will continue to. The growth rates that we see in terms of bandwidth on a month-in and month-out basis are continuing to accelerate, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think consumers are going to want to get high-quality content, and they're going to want it wherever they are, wherever they are. And as a company, we're going to be there regardless of device, encode rates, or content type. So we just announced with Verizon on wireless about a month ago, also at CES, that we're going to have a television signal to their small devices. Looks great. Completely different market, completely different encode rates, but our content will be on those devices. So, parting thoughts. First, broadcast media ties people together. It's important that we're out there and our content gets out to as many consumers as they want. As an industry, we will continue to evolve to meet consumer demand wherever it might come. So if we were to change position, how would you, knowing what you know about your network backbones, guarantee that everyone who needed a piece of content could get it when they wanted it, when, where, and how? And does your mind change if you think about a news event that instead of doing a 20 or 30x thing, does at least 100x or 200x? We actually don't know what we did in terms of traffic on the September 11th because, frankly, our systems folded in on themselves. But as I look at news traffic and I look at how we deploy news, that day is always in the back of my mind in terms of how we're going to get content to people and how we could realistically do it. So other reading, there was a couple of things I looked at over the last month as I was thinking about it. One was on one of your bulletin boards, which is this first one, Video Internet, Next Wave of Massive Disruption on the peering ecosystem. This is a pretty interesting read. William said I could put his email address up there, so hopefully you're not going to flood him, but it is actually a pretty interesting read. He goes into a lot more detail on the economics of how this would all work. If there's anyone in the audience who's more on the video side, the SMPTE Motion Imaging Journal from last month actually goes over a bunch of the underlying technologies utilized here. And there's also a lot of other stuff. So hopefully it was worth your time sitting here. It's awfully early in the morning. And I hope it provokes at least some conversation. And thank you for your time. And with that, I'll take some questions. I guess there's some microphones around, so over here on my right.
Hi, Mark. You mentioned 10% utilization as kind of your max. Coming from large shops, we're pushing many gigabits and running tens of thousands of servers. I don't see how you're able to make that cost effective.
Well, we do, I mean, if I take a link, and you can talk to really any of my providers, but all of my links, so I get at least a gig uplink, and we do really a 10% CIR on that. And we usually hold on a nominal basis to about 10%. So we are a very, and it does cause some issues at times with various providers in terms of utilization rates and things like that. People are normally used to a 50 or 60% utilization rate. However, it just doesn't work. Believe me, I have the same problem when I talk to my finance people about why do I have so many servers and what do you do with all those football servers that are sitting there in March and April? And the answer is they're really sitting there idle. And we have to have them there because it takes us too long to build up our football farms. So yeah, we really do run at 10%. Our normal, I said I had 26 gigs of capacity. If I looked at my graphs now, we're probably pushing 2.5 to 3 gigs sustained right now, and that's a pretty normal day. And that's really the way we size it. And again, it really goes back to, if you think about that live event, and you think about an event like the Super Bowl the other night, we only needed, 10 gigs, 15 gigs for a Super Bowl. At any one point in time on our uplink facilities, and that excludes CDNs, but we probably needed 15, 16 gigs internal out of that 26 for the Super Bowl. But we needed it, and then we dropped back down to 3 today. So yeah, we do operate at 10%. And
excuse me, just one follow-on question. So you do spike above the 10%. I'm assuming you're really focusing on consistently delivering a high quality of service. So do you, when you spike, are you exceeding that 10% occasionally?
Oh yeah, no, when we spike, for instance, server utilizations and things like that on a NFL game day are in the 80+ percentile range. So during our peaks, our scheduled peaks are things like the Super Bowl, NFL, entertainment finales, March Madness, things of that sort, yeah, we're close to 80% utilization at that point in time, sort of across the board on all sorts of uplinks and various other stuff. We try to leave a little more headroom on the network side in case of link failure, but we do exceed our ability to fail over in the event of problems. So we do exceed 50% even at peak times.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the presentation, Mike. Just wanted to ask you to see if perhaps there's been research in your team to ferret out or perhaps more finely define where the issues occur. What I'm getting at is you mentioned the video you want to transport amounts to about 600 kilobits a second, right?
Correct.
And so has there been significant research on your team to say, well, the congestion is occurring towards the actual link to the premise, to the customer? Is it perhaps the aggregate link to a DSLAM or a CMTS? Or is it just a hot peer between your transit and the destination eyeball network? And I guess the question is, if it's any of those things, the CDN model seems to make a lot of sense. This certainly does for audio content providers. NPR does satellite downlinks, and local radio stations will replay syndicated content, and there's no signal point of super huge aggregation, if you will. So if all of these things are perhaps already mitigated, I'm not certain that there is any benefit to anyone by having this all centralized.
Well, so you had a whole bunch of different points. One, are we as a company doing a lot of specific research on where the bottlenecks come? No, we work with our CDN partners and our uplink providers to try and track back issues when we see them. As far as where we set our encode rates, we really do look at commercial adoption of things like DSL over the years. So as people have gotten more DSL, we sort of turn that up. So we look at consumer metrics a lot, and we say, okay, if we turn our knob up to 600K, does our video usage drop? And if we see our video usage drop, we turned it too hard. So we tend to find where we're at by really just watching our utilization rates and looking at what happens as sort of cause and effect. And you try and only make one change at a time. As far as use of CDNs, at the beginning when I said we had 26 gigs of capacity, we also use a couple of large CDNs. So a lot of our image delivery, a lot of our video delivery does come from CDNs. So we don't own and operate all of our video distribution. We do a fair bit of video distribution off of our network. We're the origin. We've got all the uplink capacity. I have to use it for something. So I use my base CIR and I serve video over it. But really, we do all of our bursting events with CDN. So March Madness, for instance, when we're talking about potentially 500,000 people, I'm not serving any of that video off of my infrastructure.
As a follow-up to that, it seems as a user of these broadband services, for example, in Chicago, the chief congestion wasn't, in fact, the link to the user. My DSL happened to go to a chassis that had a single OC12 for several thousand customers, and it had no headroom. And so I couldn't do anything to get better service and couldn't watch this kind of video. And so in these cases, I'm not sure that any alternative is appropriate. I mean, I think you're going to be stuck.
Right, and in a unicast model, I would agree with that. You know, as I scale to several 100,000 people watching video in a market, you're right, a single chassis can cause us issues, and that's just not going to scale. So the question really for the group and for people to talk about is, how do things like, honestly, I think multicast is really probably the viable option if it ever becomes a viable commercial option for us and actually gets mass deployment. Peer-to-peer is a very interesting technology. I think it's definitely something to not pay attention to at your peril, and I think that's true for all of us, myself as a content company and you guys as network companies. I think you run the risk of ignoring that one at your folly. But I think really for mass market live video, you've got something like multicast needs to get out there. As far as on demand, I mean, on demand is always going to be a point-to-point, and it's really just a question of how you distribute it. Maybe it's a CDN model, maybe it's a centralized model where everything was back to me, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be point-to-point. Even peer-to-peer is a point-to-point connection. So,
thank you.
Thanks. I'll go over here.
Yeah, Todd Underwood, Renesas. So I've been interested recently in the number of people who are deploying serious applications on infrastructure like Amazon's EC2 cluster. And people tend to do that because they want to punt the problem of engineering for peaks to someone else who's going to engineer those peaks over a large number of different customers. So have you guys looked at either that specific service or things like it? And in particular, commenting on the network side, it sounds like you have significant internal network resources about distributing this video to your servers that exceed the resources required to distribute video from your servers to the customers. So have you looked at that, and is that a viable option for you?
We look at it all the time, and whether or not we've seriously looked at the Amazon one, I can't really comment on. But we look at options all the time in terms of how we could offload various bits of traffic. So, I mean, in the case of the Amazon one, it's really how do you offload computing power. We do have a lot of computing power needs, specifically around our fantasy product line. And it's a really hard problem for us to figure out how to offload some of those given the way the software works, given latency issues, the mere number of updates we're doing on any given second. So we do look at those, but at the end of the day, it becomes a question of how would you offload various pieces against the short-term cost and engineering time versus the cost to deploy another server. And yeah, we would love to decrease our server farm as a high-level statement from CBS, but realistically, it's not going to work for us in the short term. So we continue to add servers. We're in the process of adding another couple hundred servers right now for next fall, and we don't see that really changing. That said, it's something that we'd be foolish not to look at. At the same point in time, it's really, until this is really mature, and until I can go to market and say, I've got a 500 gig event, and I need to do it, and I need it to be on a rate card. Until we get to a rate card situation where this is done day in and day out, I don't know how we're going to do anything other than a lot of custom engineering stuff. So March Madness, for instance, I'm involved with our CDN to figure out how they're going to do it, and they're deploying it. So I'm not doing it. I've basically punted the decision to someone else. That said, I'm the guy at the end of the day that's going to take the call from management if it fails. So if I didn't think they could do it, I'm not doing my job. So
thanks.
Center.
Hi, I'm Marshall Eubanks, and I'm actually a co-chair of the Multicast Backbone Deployment Working Group at the IETF. And
there you go.
This is more like a comment, really. We need people like you, or your staff, to participate in the process, because we've been trying to spur multicast deployment for a decade now, depending on how you want to count it.
Depending on how you want to count, yeah. It's been one of those, agreed, it's been one of those things been out there forever.
There's basically nobody from the heavy content side who participates in the process. So for example, we're working on something called automatic AMT, automatic multicasting without tunnels, which is a sort of a tunnel failover solution designed to work as a shim more or less in your PC or your Mac or whatever. You just, it's just there and it works. And if this multicast is available, you get the multicast, and if not, you don't. I do too. And but without sort of participation from your side of the house, this kind of like, we're not sure if we were doing the right thing or even going down the right direction.
Yeah,
right?
and it's...
So I'd like to encourage you to come to the meetings and join the mailing list and so on.
Let's touch base after, and certainly send me an email. I think it's one of those things where it's a chicken and egg problem, and it's not a content provider only problem. It's not a standard problem. It's really going to have to be one of those where we, as an industry on the media side, since we're obviously probably the biggest users, or would be some of the biggest users at least initially, until consumers come in with all sorts of other things that they would use. I think it's also got to come in with service providers and others that would actually manage it and do things like that. Because in the long run, I don't think it's something that we're going to want to maintain or other things. Again, we want sort of a run book of costs. But certainly follow up with me after, and let's touch base.
It was a good talk, by the way.
Thanks. Senator again.
Yeah, thanks for coming and talking to us about this stuff. We don't usually get to see things from the 800-pound gorilla content provider perspective.
I think the usual word is dinosaur is the one I usually hear. But
I was trying to be diplomatic and all. I'm Rob Seastrom from Server Vault, and I know it's unusual for me to try to be diplomatic, but I'd like to bring one particular point to your attention, which is that the multicast looks really appealing, but I think that some of that appeal may be due to the lack of deployment experience with it, and that it's sort of that we hope that at the edge that it works very well, and there are some topologies and technologies on the edge that it undoubtedly will work very well with, such as cable modem and PON, probably, depending on the equipment that's deployed and whether it's capable of doing that, because those are things that naturally lend themselves to a multicast sort of thing. But the one potential really big tripping point is things like wholesale DSL, where you're bringing customers back over PPPoE, over L2TP tunnels to various places. So your point of first split for that multicast, where despite still being a multicast protocol, you are turning it into multiple streams that go to individual users. And ideally, you'd be having that happen inside the machines themselves as they picked bits off the wire, right? But with something like a wholesale DSL sort of thing, you're actually doing it at the LNS point, which means that the multicast fixes your problems in the backbone only to move them to the edge where you're handing off to the wholesale provider and just mash those circuits. So that's something where the multicast, the value that you get from putting multicast in the backbone may or may not be any better than the value that you get from just using a CDN, and it doesn't buy you anything at the very edge when your customers are running that sort of technology. And I don't know what percentage of your possible customers are running that, but even if it's a 30-35% thing, it's something that certainly needs to be watched out for.
Yeah, and I mean, I throw these out there for discussions and all of that on purpose, and it's sort of what I said I was going to do. I'm not pretending that any one of these things taken by themselves really answer all the questions. But I will posit that if we do nothing, and I continue to put big events out there, and as an industry, it's always about one-upmanship in my industry, right? So I do one thing, and ABC is going to do something else, and then I've got to one-up them, and then you get into these things, and it's all good for the consumer. I'm putting more content out as an industry. I'm putting it out in a higher quality. Consumers love it. But if we've got networks that can't deal with it, we're all going to find ourselves in a world of hurt. And it's not in my best interest. It's not in anyone else's. So I'm not saying any of this stuff is right or wrong or the right answer, but it's sort of the general, again, open it up for discussion and go from there. Sorry, Senator.
No problem. Joe from Shaw. Just a question. It's from the business model idea that basically at this point you're paying or you're involved with distribution channels, obviously, you have your areas or markets that you're going for, and that's what you're talking about when you're talking about New York City. You have the affiliate channel and all that type of stuff in there. I guess from a business model, wouldn't you want to try and form an affiliation with a network, an ISP or whatever, that they then multicast it all in their own network, and then you send them a single stream, so then they become that distribution channel for you. And then you're following the same model that you already have. It's just a matter that the customer is getting its content in a different way. Instead of via uplink, it might be across the network, and then the redistribution is handled normally. Whatever protocol they use is their choice.
Right, and there's certain, I mean, look, that's how we work with cable companies today on the video side, and maybe, go back a couple of slides, and maybe for live video events, we never get away from the model that we have today where it's a transmission model. That, we have a very efficient model. It works. Cable companies know how to scale it. We know how to economic model it. Maybe economically we can never get to true IP delivery for everything. I don't know that that's true or not, and I'm not stating that it is, but maybe. So for live events, maybe we can't do it large. Maybe we do have to set up a whole other ecosystem, and that's sort of also another point I made, which is how do people get paid? Because clearly as a company we recognize that there's infrastructure involved and people have those costs, but we do have to figure out how that models out, and we just have to figure out how to model those costs out and be fair and equitable across the board. And then, we can model this out in any number of ways. If I have a consistent model that allows me to model this out and it works, something we're always interested in. I don't know exactly how this is all going to play out in terms of how the negotiations would work and who the players would be. And I mean, it gets pretty tricky because now you're into realms where we need consumer-facing connections, and those consumers could either be business or they could be home users. And from an industry on the networking side, you sell business versus separately from home side. It's sort of all sorts of logistical issues that start to boggle the mind into realms of we'll never do anything, which is why today we do everything over the public internet today. It works. Everyone knows how to deal with it. We pay transit and we pray. And, it's not really, if we're still in this position 5 years from now, I think we're, a lot of us haven't done our job.
Okay, one further question just about the idea of uplinking and that type of idea. Would you consider, because of the very low latency time for real-time IP services that fail over, like Iptv and that type of thing, having that as a going forward model at some point for communication to local distribution channels, like for cable or whatever? Just curious, at a technical level.
Yeah, so not really my area of CBS. I mean, sort of as a generalized statement, we'll of course pursue anything. What I will tell you that when I get into my, when I talk to my video engineers within CBS, and these are the guys that really know high bit rates and know very low latencies and incredibly high uptime requirements and low packet loss. I mean, they're measuring things in ratios that on the IT side and IT side we just never get to. So we're just not there yet in a range that we would do it. Now, that said, we do a lot of IP delivery of content internal to the network for content moving and things like that for non-real-time systems. So it's definitely heading there. The economics are clearly there. But understand that things like latency and things like that, when you're talking about real-time video signals and you're talking about a 256 meg SDI signal, you're talking about a lot of bits, and you can't afford any frame drops because a frame drop really is a killer. And if we screw up in our network infrastructure, you on the consumer side, once it's stepped down to anywhere from 10 to 20 megabits a second, you'll notice it. We take that side of the shop very seriously. So would we do it? Yeah, I think eventually. I don't see why not. I mean, the economics will eventually get there. but it's not, you know, I would posit anyways, and again, I'm not the right guy, but I'd posit it's not any time in the near, you know, sort of call it three-year horizon. But for all I know, someone's out there and about to deploy it. I'll read in the press release tomorrow.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thomas Eckert, Cisco Systems. Before trying to ask you a question, I wanted to just quickly say something about what Robert had been saying about the wholesale stuff. I think it's clear to everybody in the industry for a long time that the wholesale model for internet isn't the one that you would want to use for, let's say, multicast content distribution. There have been a lot of proposals around, so it just goes back to the usual business problem of what do we need to have as a business case to deploy the new technology to make it more scalable. Toward you, I was kind of wondering in how far do you think you can make the business model of actually saying we have all these terabits of potential unicast content that, for example, we would like to have multicasted, given that you as the, I think you called yourself dinosaur, already are in hundreds of millions of homes, and there already are HT sets, and that stuff is all working, right? So for once, that technology is going to move over to IP slowly by itself, right? So, I mean, on the access, there are service providers starting to put IPTV in there. Your content will be on the top of what's available there. And so within the US market, I'm just saying at some point in time you'll get the request from exactly those providers. Can we save the head end and get your content natively as IP already, right? It's more like if you want to have this pull model where somebody on a different device than a normal TV set through its normal TV service would want to pull the service, right?
And if you recall at the beginning, though, I did specifically say that I wasn't really talking about the IPTV as sort of the cable box replacement. I sort of specifically wanted this conversation to be more about the pull model, about random access pulls from any device.
So let me ask you.
But that's sort of, so there's a whole separate discussion you could have about IPTV and all that. And I'm not sure I'm the right guy to necessarily have those discussions.
Yeah, but I think there will definitely be over time a merging of these two technologies because the base will be the same, right? It's kind of MPEG over IP, whether it's kind of provisioned hop by hop or whether it's being pulled from the user. But have you been exploring kind of trying to get that content out to other markets that don't have it, like let's say outside the US or so? How important is, let's say, the international market for you versus the domestic one?
So official corporate speak on this one. So how important is the international market? The international market doesn't really fall within my sphere of influence. So I'm the U.S. portion of the business. There's a whole other group that looks at international syndication and how our content works internationally. So I really can't comment on that. I'm really focused on the U.S. market. So not to sort of pass the buck on that, but I really don't know. So back to center. And I don't, Steve, how are you doing on time here? Okay.
Thank you very much for coming out this morning to speak to us.
Thanks.
Are exchange point operators incenting you to peer widely?
Tier 1 providers are coming to me with bit proposals all the time, and no, I mean, I think, you know, the catch for us as a content company is we're not a traditional peering company. You know, I push a lot of bits in one direction. I don't have any eyeballs on my side of the fence, so I'm not a traditional peer by any stretch of the imagination.
That doesn't stop Google or Yahoo or any of the other networks.
Or the BBC.
Or the BBC, right.
Different markets, different companies, different scale.
If they gave you 10 gig E-ports and a variety of exchange points, would you change that stance?
If they gave them to me, sure. And my email was on the front cover if anyone wants to give them to me.
Thank you.
Rob Seastrom again. You mentioned P2P stuff, which I'm not sure will actually be a good starter because you're talking about being constrained as far as downstream bandwidth already, and people's upstream bandwidth is as a rule much less than their downstream bandwidth in most broadband cases. However, should it be something that you look at seriously, I have a request. No, actually, I implore you, do not build it on top of existing P2P protocols. Develop a new one in partnership with the kind of people you see in this room and the kind of people you see at the IETF. which is knowledgeable about network topology and does not try to grab stuff from the other side of the ocean if there is stuff that is available a couple of states over.
So I doubt you'd see us as a company develop our own standard. Sorry. I don't think you'd see us as a company develop our own software that we'd want to distribute. There are lots of commercial entities out there that are doing some interesting stuff that are out there, and I'm not really qualified to talk about it, but in terms of how they fundamentally work under the hood. But yeah, there's a reason why I'm sort of
there's developing the software as an in-house, and then there's developing the software as in economically pushing the software to be developed. And this is the sort of thing that you should be pushing for as somebody who cares about whether the technology works well.
I'll keep that in mind.
I understand. But their core business is making the customers happy.
No, their core business is getting money from advertisers. Hi, Ted Seeley. Whoa, that's loud. I got a couple questions, if that's all right. First one, and to Rob's point,
as long as people aren't getting upset
on the
about time.
P2P front, are you seeing or do you foresee erosion from the internet into your core business?
I mean, in general, I don't know that the internet is necessarily eroding our business from sort of call it a theft point of view or what have you, although that is out there and it's out there. As a company in general, we recognize that what we're competing with is people's attention and their time that they do have. So, I mean, it's not a secret that as an industry, ratings over the long haul for certain types of content has slid over the years because people get things like news differently. I mean, this is not something that's a secret. We're not sitting and saying that it doesn't exist. Clearly, we have, I mean, I would argue, and I think others would argue, that we have an issue of just attention and the number of hours people have. So if someone's playing a game for 3 hours, they're not watching TV for 3 hours. Right. That said, television viewing over the long haul hasn't significantly changed if you look at a lot of the metrics, and I'm not necessarily the right guy to talk about all the research and everything else, but television viewer and viewing over the years has sort of kept up. But we as a company would be foolish not to be thinking about ways of getting into sort of all of these different industries and things of that sort. I mean, why are we doing our video signals to the cell phones? Well, because that's where the consumers are. Why do I have a job? I mean, believe me, if we weren't taking it seriously, CBS could shut down my entire group. They could put their heads in the sand and go back to doing television only and pretending the world didn't exist. I don't think, clearly as a company we don't hold that mindset. We have no thought that this is where consumers are or not. I mean, it's really, we're really looking at it as we're a content company. We have content. However the technology changes and morphs over the years, we're going to follow. And, I'm not necessarily, I may help lead, I may help push, but a lot of things, I mean, look at YouTube. I mean, short form video, flash delivery, progressive download. I mean, if you had said that was going to happen 2 years ago, I mean, everyone in this room would have sort of looked at you sideways and this is never going to happen. And there's a lot of people that wish they had thought about it sooner. I don't know that we as a company are necessarily going to lead and adopt anything that's going to push it. I think you're going to see a lot of things come at us sideways from left field that we're going to have to react to. I think we're well positioned to react to those. I mean, we have a deal with YouTube and others for content, but I mean that's really the net at the end of the day. It's really how do we follow? How does our content follow users and move forward from there? I guess one more question.
One more quickie. This one's okay. I totally am cool and support your advertising or your broadcast, of the sporting events for outside the market. I think that's real cool. I've actually watched some of them, much to the chagrin of my coworkers. Too bad. But do you see a decrease in that feed over time as IT departments adapt and block it? Because I know that our IT guys block it on the inside of our corporate network, but I'm not on that network, so too bad. But
yeah, an interesting position in that I used to run the IT ops for CBS and sort of had a lot of the same issues on the inside. So I was at the same time doing March Madness. I had my network guy saying, well, what happens if you know, this location, 3 people pop up this signal and you're going to take down their T1. Yeah, you know, it's going to happen. I think we accept it, and arguably the reason we probably don't have higher numbers is people are doing that. We'll see where we grow to. You know, it's definitely out there, and if people are choosing to do that with their employees and cap the usage, it's really their call. I mean, it is what it is. Consumers will still get it eventually, so can't solve it. So, sorry. It's, you know, it's a chicken. Look, there's smart IT folks out there that'll figure out how to shut me down real quickly. So it's just sort of, yeah, I could do it, but more work for me, more work for somebody else. And so, anyways, with that, thank you very much.